Welcome to Legislative Updates, the first show for 2020. And John, thank you so much for coming in here on early morning hours. And if you're not familiar with the show, let me share a little bit of it with you. It's Legislative Updates, and my co-host is John Barker, representative from the 70th District. And John is a retired judge from the 8th Judicial District, which is Marion, Morris, Dickinson, and Geary County. And John, you're a farmer and a rancher now, and a retired judge, and now you're starting your 8th year in the legislature for the 70th District.
It's my 8th year. Retired 8 years ago. I ran for the House, was fortunate, was elected, and have been reelected since then. So between January and May, I'm in Topeka quite a bit, or even in the summertime. This past summer, I've been up there a number of times, and so it's a different perspective from being a judge.
Yeah, and I know in your case, as being the representative, the district you cover as a representative is what area?
Okay, it's all of Dickinson County except a couple of precincts in Harrington. I have one township, the Chapman Township, in Clay County, which is Longford. Mm-hmm. And then I go down northern part of Marion County, Durham, Lehigh. But I don't have Hillsborough, but I have the city of Marion. And I go out to 77, in fact, a little across 77, and then go back north to Lincolnville, back into Harrington.
It's a wide area, certainly.
It's a wide area. If I'm in Longford and I need to get to Marion, I'm an hour and 10 minutes from there.
Yeah. And one of the things with the legislative updates that I've always found so enjoyable is you can read articles in the paper and in other forums. But you take the time on a Friday afternoon to come in after the legislature ends for that week and come in, and you'll bring other people that are involved in the legislature in some form and come in and share what's going on that past week in the legislature. And I know because I know you, that you don't have really an off season because you're always preparing for the next session, and there's a lot of updates and sharing with others to do, and you do a good job with that. And so I appreciate that, appreciate the time that you put in on it, because it's tremendous. And I know I've said this before many times on the show, that there's a real advantage of having an experienced legislator representing your district, because then what you have is that person works up into other committees and just has more connections, and it really helps. So what committees are you on?
Well, I'm chairman of the Legislative Post Audit. I also chair Federal and State Affairs Committee, which is a large committee. It's what we call the exempt committees. There's 3 of them: Appropriations, Tax, and Federal and State Affairs, which means we can actually work bills all through the session. Other committees have to shut down what we call turnaround day.
Okay.
But you're right. I've been up there a number of times. I had 2 interim committees, summer committees, to explore certain issues that were important to the legislature. And I had 2 this year that I chaired for what was called the Select Committee on Federal and State Affairs. So I had senators on it as well as House members. I did one of those on the 23rd of October and a second one on the 30th of October so that we could prepare for the session. I have a number of bills that we've been working on all summer that will be introduced probably the first week of session, and then I'll set hearings after that. But it's more than most people think about going up there, because you only get paid for the 90 days, but you go up there quite a bit more than that, and you meet with other colleagues, and you try to work out some compromises. And of course, I actually work with the governor's office on a couple of issues. Many issues we disagree on, but there are a few that we can agree on, and we try to go forward with those. But I find it very interesting work. It's different though than being a judge. With this, and I need 63 of my friends in the House to get one of my bills passed.
I understand, and I know this about it too, because we've had this conversation off screen at different times about, well, another state has adopted this legislation, or the federal has adopted this particular legislation, and I know that you're not shy about picking up the phone, calling to others who are involved in that legislation in other states and say, tell me how this worked, what was the research, what did you go through, what's the pluses, what's the negatives, and it helps you to be prepared when you go into the legislature and somebody says, hey, I got this really neat idea, and then you pull out file with a lot of research and a lot of information on it, good or bad.
And we do look at that. I've got friends in several organizations that I've got a friend, a senator in Ohio, who did the medical marijuana bill in Ohio last year, and so he sent me all of his material, and we've went through it here with our research people and our revisor's office. But yeah, there's a constant exchange of information. We've worked with folks in Oklahoma, sports book gaming, which is something that the governor wants, and I think it's probably time for the state and many of our folks out there in rural Kansas and that don't go to casinos may want to make a bet on a college basketball game or something. So we're working on that. We've seen some of the mistakes other states have made. We try not to make those. So that's going to be one of the issues that we take up this year in my committee, Federal State Affairs.
Yeah, and I know some of those connections are because of your years in the military as well. And we're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. When we come back from break, we're going to talk a little bit about what John sees coming up in the legislature this time. Stay with us. Welcome back to the first edition of Legislative Updates for 2020. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host, John Barker, representative of the 70th District. And John, before we cut away to break, we were talking a little bit about the legislature going to be going back into session. And what do you see happening here with the legislature? What issues do you see that are going to be coming up?
Well, we go back in Monday, the 13th. We go in at 2 o'clock. It'll be a short session, and then following day, the 14th, we'll start our committee hearings, and there'll be bill introductions in different committees. In my committee, I think there's 2 or 3 bills that will be introduced that day, and then we will I've already set an agenda for that week because I need to set it up a week before. So we'll be having bill introductions and some informational hearings. But some of the things that will probably be heard at some point in time during the session is, one, the good point is our revenues are up. In December, they were up about 39.2 million, or about 6.1% above the estimates that we thought we would have.
Great.
That's great. So we could end up. This is for the first 6 months, of course. If you look down the road and if it continues in that trend, we could be up a couple of $100 million or more. The question is, what do you do with it? Do you want to spend it, or do you want to put it in what we call our rainy day fund? In case things, because if you start looking at our budget, because we have little control over a lot of the budget. Health and Human Services caseloads go up. That's an automatic increase. Of course, the mandate from the Supreme Court about education, we're going to put $100 million in there, additional funds for the next year or two. So if you look down 3 years, we have a deficit of about $600 million. So, we have to look at all of that. Now, I understand a lot of legislators don't want to look down 2 or 3 years, but I like to look down and see where we'll be. So those are some of the things. Of course, a couple of the big issues, we have a new Chief Justice. I was at Chief Ness's retirement. Marla Luker is the new Chief Justice. She was our departmental justice when I was a judge. So I've got a great rapport with her, and she's a very nice and very intelligent, smart justice. So she'll do well, I think. But we're going to talk about sports book. We have medical marijuana on our agenda. We have as you may last year's Supreme Court rendered a decision on the dismemberment abortion issue, which kind of opened it up, where it's almost like abortion on demand.
Right.
And that's I have a lot of concern about that, and so do my fellow legislators. So we have a constitutional amendment that's being drafted that will give that authority back to the legislature. And of course, being a constitutional amendment, I'm sure the governor wouldn't sign it if it was a bill, but it's a constitutional amendment, so it just needs to pass both bodies, the Senate and the House, by 2/3, and then it's put on the ballot, and let the people of the state of Kansas tell us who they want to control that issue.
When would that come up if it goes through those
the 2/3
procedure that you mentioned?
It would probably, we have to set a date for the election, and it would probably either be in the primary, which would be in August of this year, or it would be in the general election, which would be in November. And then it would give both sides an opportunity to go out and talk to the public and see what the public wants. You know, we serve the people of the state of Kansas, and I have no problems. And some of my Democratic friends don't like that, but you know, let the people tell us what they want. And so it's basically issues: do we let the people tell us or not? Let them vote or not? So I'm hopeful that we'll get that passed, and then it will go to the voters.
Yeah, are you expecting a lot of resistance to that? Well, I don't know, is it a bill or is it?
It will be a constitutional amendment.
Ultimately, but I mean, when you submit it, what is it in that form when you submit it?
It's in a constitutional
amendment.
Right, it's not a bill. It'd be a House concurrent resolution or a House resolution.
Okay.
And it'll probably be introduced in both the Senate and at the House at the same time. And then we'll have hearings in our committees. And then if we pass it out, then we'll go to the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate. But it must pass by 2/3 because it is a constitutional amendment. So.
And so then, even if the governor vetoed it,
governor has no say.
No say in it. So then it would go to the people.
And it goes straight on the ballot.
Awesome.
So that's one of the things I think that will be interesting. I also have a smoking 21 bill that I was working on this summer, and then the federal government in their spending bill put it in. And President Trump was very supportive of it. But we need to now kind of modify our bill to comply with the federal requirements, because it's like they can't mandate to the state.
Right.
However, there's always either funds or a loss of funds if you don't follow their lead.
It's not a mandate, but if you don't want the money, or if you want the money,
right,
you have to follow it.
You have to follow. So we'll have that, and of course there's a few other bills that we'll be working at. But you know, the governor wants to re-amortize capers, which I'm not for. It gives her money up front initially, but when you get $200 million up front, if you're going to pay it over 30 years, it runs into real money.
We talked about that last year when that was coming up for consideration, and I don't remember if it was Jim Denning, but probably was Jim. Somebody had those figures up there, and the amount it was going to cost was amazing, to take some money now and then kick the can down the road.
And that's exactly what she wants to do. And you know, we have an unfunded actuarial. We have a plan. We've paid extra money every year on it. The market has done really well the last few years, because we have an assumption rate of 7.75. It used to be 8%, but now it's 7.75. And so we issued bonds. Those bonds are paying more than that. So we're really working hard, because we want to get rid of that unfunded actuarial. And by taking the money now, the $200 or $300 million that she wants, you know, it's going to cost $800 million.
Probably pretty close
over
to $1 billion over that time. We're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates with John Barker. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host, John Barker, representative from the 70th District. And John, we're getting ready to go into the situation where the legislature will go back into session on the 13th of this month. And so this is kind of a preview of what you anticipate, what you have been, information you have received, and those types of things. So there's going to be a lot of things going on in the legislature this year coming up, and a lot of important things, because there's some philosophical differences between the governor's office and I would suspect the majority of the Republicans about fiscal responsibility and some of those things.
All right, Doug, you're absolutely correct. You know, we talked about the capers. She wants to re-amortize it. It costs, you know, it's getting money up front, and of course, paying it over the next 30 years costs. You have to pay at 7.75. The state does, because that's mandated. Now, the board of directors of capers has the authority to re-amortize. They've chosen not to. So the governor wants to go around them and come to the legislature. I don't think she'll prevail in that, but she is going to try it. The other thing that came out yesterday or day before was that she wants to do a reorganizational order, executive reorganizational order. And that's kind of unique in our statute. The governor can do that, and the legislature, within 60 days after she submits it to us, has to take some action. If they do not take any action, it automatically happens. it occurs. So she's proposing that she consolidate Department of Children and Families with KDADS, the Kansas Department of Aging and Disabilities, and also adding in that juvenile services that are presently under the Department of Corrections. Now, Laura Howard, Secretary Howard, presently acts as both secretary of both these departments. Normally, they each have their own secretary. And I think personally she's done a fairly good job trying to get it reorganized. But the legislature must take an action. I was reading last night that she did not consult the legislature at all about whether this would be a good thing. And I'm talking about leadership, Senate President, Speaker of the House. And so they all came out and said, it may be a good idea, but she's never consulted with us.
We just don't know it yet.
So what happened to her, working bipartisan? They were surprised, and of course with the legislature starting on Monday, if she submits it then, that starts the clock for 60 days.
So what happens, John, at the end of, within that 60 days, if the legislature says, no, we don't want to do that?
Well, we can do that. We can either amend or we can reject it, but we must take action within 60 days.
Otherwise it becomes,
automatic.
as she has said,
it automatically becomes.
It's kind of like one of those bills. If it sits on her desk for more than 10 days, it gets automatically approved.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, but the concern, I think, from both the legislative bodies is that they were not consulted until she came out with the announcement. So she didn't do any prep, or what we call prep work, talk to the leadership and say, I'm going to do this. What do you think? How, if we need to change a little bit, let us work together. None of that occurred.
So you guys found out about it when it came out in the paper?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's not what she had indicated when she took office, that she wanted to work with the legislature. And we've just not seen that. Now, I've personally worked with her office on an individual bill basis, like on sports book, and she would tell her staff to tell me that, well, if it doesn't have this in it, I'll veto it. And but that's her prerogative. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting year. They're going to be, the bills that I mentioned, plus from all the other committees, there'll be some interesting bills that come out. I'm kind of looking forward to the debate on them. Because that's when, as you know, cross-examination is when you get the truth as a judge from the defense attorney. So, the debate brings out quite a bit. People look at it in different perspectives, and so I'm looking forward to that part. Hopefully, it will be a 90-day session, and we'll be out 2 days after Mother's Day, and hopefully we will be out before then. But it's going to be a challenging year. It's also an election year, so people will have that in their mind, and they want to get out early to go out and campaign. So I'm looking forward to May.
This proposal that the governor's office has made on a new, I guess it's called, I don't know, is it a new department called Human Services? Right.
As they're going to consolidate these two departments into one department, but they're also going to take away the juvenile services that are presently the responsibility of Department of Corrections and put them also in this. So it's going to be one huge bureaucracy.
Yeah, I think I read in the paper there's going to be 6,000 employees in that new department.
Right.
I guess I don't understand the rationale of taking the part away from the Secretary of Corrections or Department of Corrections.
Of course, she's not consulted with the legislature, so we do not know her thinking on that.
I'm not alone then.
Right, you're not alone. She's not consulted with the legislature, so this is all new. But it does have a 60-day period that if we don't do something, it just happens.
So you're anticipating that this is going to get quite a bit of attention as soon as the legislature comes into session?
Based on my conversations yesterday when I was in Topeka with the leadership, yes.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll get it all worked through, and it'll either happen or not. We're either going to amend it or reject it.
All right. We're going to cut away, take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Legislative Updates with John Barker. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host, John Barker, representative from the 70th District. And John, I know that every week when you come in, you try to make the arrangements to have somebody come in from the legislature come in with you, and they can share a different perspective. Who do you have lined up coming in next week?
Next week, I'm going to have the Majority Leader in the Senate,
Jim Denning.
Jim Denning, who's been on before. I know we've had the Speaker on, the Speaker Pro Tem. I like to bring in the decision makers. We've had the Attorney General on, of course.
Yeah.
At one point in time, we had a Lieutenant Governor on. So
we did.
We try to bring in I try to bring in a number of different areas so that they can give us their perspective. Yeah, Jim Denning will be next week. Probably the week after, it may be the House Majority Leader.
Excellent. Appreciate it, John. Thanks for watching Legislative Updates with John Barker. See you next week.